Good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's Meeting of the Minds webinar entitled Smart Cities, Global Trends and Local Delivery, Case Studies from the Netherlands, South Africa, and the United States. My name is Jessie Hahn. I'm the Executive Director of Meeting of the Minds. We're glad you're with us today. We are a global thought leadership platform with year-round programming, and our mission is to connect global urban sustainability, innovation, and technology leaders across sectors to share best practices, tools, and solutions. We do that through our blog, cityminded.org, our monthly webinar series, pop-up events, workshops, and of course our annual summit. Our annual summit, Meeting of the Minds 2016, convenes next month in the San Francisco Bay Area from October 25 to 27. We're almost sold out, so if you want to join us, get your tickets before the price goes up this Saturday. Today we have three presenters from Deloitte who will be presenting the following order. Hans Tubin is Strategy and Innovation Director at Deloitte Consulting in the Netherlands. Denise Lee previously served as the Deloitte Africa Smart Cities and Emerging Technologies leader and recently relocated to Deloitte and Touche LLP in the United States, where she's a senior manager. And then we have Jim O'Gara, who's the Managing Director at Deloitte and Touche LLP in the US. So we're going to start with Jim for a little intro, and then we're going to have Hans, Denise, and Jim again. Jim, take it away.
Thanks very much, Jessie, and welcome to everybody today. We're really looking forward to a lively session and very happy to be able to share with everybody in the webinar some of our experiences in Deloitte on smart cities. Smart cities, I will just talk briefly about what we're going to speak about on the next slide. You'll see the agenda for today, and we're going to speak a little bit about our smart cities approach. And I'd be very interested to hear from the people who are on this webinar how they have been, or if they have been grappling at all with the definition of smart cities, because certainly we have, and I think a lot of other people have, in trying to pin down exactly what is it we're speaking about. But very quickly, just to say, we think of our smart cities as a few sectors that we get involved in, domains, if you like, in the economy, mobility, security, education, living, and water and energy. And we look at how these can improve the quality of life and the economic competitiveness and sustainability of the urban environments, and wrapped around this we have the information, communication, and technology infrastructures. So that's how we think about smart cities. The next slide. It's a big area when you look at the developments that are happening there. One sort of estimate that we've done sees it as about 35, 30, or $40 billion being invested in what we call the incremental smart city aspect, i.e. something that's over and above the regular investment in the infrastructure and governance and other systems that make up smart cities, but just a smart city element. So that's a market that's going exponentially, and it's being driven by the trends that we've all seen, unprecedented urbanization. We're all aware of the numbers there, in the exponential innovation and disruption. The increasing concern over safety and security and the ways that technology allows this to happen. And then, I mean, the enormous benefits that can be unleashed by these technologies in trending green, in reducing greenhouse gases, in allocating supply and demand more efficiently, and therefore reducing the amount of resources that are consumed and wasted, if you wish. So on the next slide, just to briefly talk, Hans Tubin is one of our leaders in smart cities in the Netherlands. He'll speak about his case study next. we're fortunate in Deloitte that we do have a very strong network of member firms, and we meet regularly on topics of interest, and smart cities is one of them. Denise Lee is a recent arrival in the US. She came from Deloitte South Africa and brings, a really interesting perspective from the South Africa side. And we also believe that the smart cities ideas do provide a way for technologies to leapfrog, allow emerging market urban centers to actually leapfrog their way in terms of competitiveness and sustainability. And then I'm Jim O'Gara. I'm with our practice here in Washington, D.C., and I'll be talking a bit about the US-Mexico border and what we're looking at applying there. So I'll move on to Hans. If you could start, Hans, and bring us through your case study, please.
Yes, thank you, and welcome everybody. Thank you for joining. My name is Hans Steuben. I'm a Strategy and Innovation Director for the public sector in the Netherlands. And I've been working with the City of Amsterdam and universities on societal issues since about 6 years. In the last 1.5 to 2 years, we've been working on smart cities, and the work ranges from strategy work to innovative projects. For those of you that don't know Amsterdam, it's the capital of the Netherlands. The Netherlands is a small country of around 17 million people. Amsterdam Metropolitan region is around 3 million people, a bit on how you count. What were the challenges that Amsterdam was facing when we started out? Well, one of the biggest ones was that they lacked a successful intentional innovation in the city. So especially because they were working from the existing business model, so people, civil servants, had to try and innovate within their sectors and business units, and that was very frustrating for a lot of people because they were always hindered somehow by the way they were held accountable and all the other work that they also had to do. So they couldn't keep the pace and couldn't get to the innovation that they wanted and that was needed also. So one of the things that was also there was the need for, they didn't have a clear direction. So there was a need for a more strategic approach, policy alignment for innovation in the city of Amsterdam. Another challenge that was that they were basically, in smart cities, there was a lot of technology push from vendors. And for them, it was very difficult to pick out the projects that would be beneficial and the ones that would be maybe not as beneficial. So that led to some charming pilots, but not to scalable effects and money down the drain. So they wanted to, grab the wheel basically in how to drive innovation and how to drive that in smart city area. The third one was what I already said, and added to that, there was also a lack of technical expertise, especially in the new technologies, a difficulty in implementing that, and of course the performance measures in the organization that led people to not focus on their innovation projects. So the first phase of our work, we've worked with Amsterdam civil servants and their ecosystem stakeholders, and you can go to the next slide, where we have been working with them on the development of a strategy and point of view based on these on disruptive technologies and social innovations. So what we've done is we've set up an innovation accelerator in the city of Amsterdam. First, we've done it in our own office because we had the facilities, and then Amsterdam opened up their own labs. In this way, what we started was we created a new environment where we established ideation and innovation processes, workshops and labs, and an environment where they were separated from day-to-day operations. So they were not always pulled back into the old ways of working or stakeholders that wanted them to do the things in the old-fashioned way. The next, the other point is that we placed emphasis on creating new and innovative solutions to the problems that were faced by the Amsterdam population, which was much more an outside-in approach. making use of personas, for instance, and also looking at these problems from a different perspective. And how we did that was that we had a co-creative process where the civil servants worked alongside technology experts, corporate entities, social entrepreneurs, local startups, universities, etc. And with the ideation and innovation processes that we had in place, we were able to enable rapid prototyping of ideas, focusing on the stakeholder needs, so on what these personas' pain points were, etc. So in the current innovation model, what we have done is we have developed a 6-step approach before we go to scaling up. So the first one is to develop ideas and co-creation with experts. The second is to prioritize winning ideas through the board. We develop proof of concepts for selected ideas, and we determine impact to workforce and skill gaps. And sometimes that leads to doing the work not in the city, but in another way with ecosystem partners. We determine the approach for embedding and or implementing the proven ideas, and then we document and analyze the lessons learned. And if we work with ecosystem partners, of course, what we try to do is we try to scale up the experiments and scale up the pilots to a citywide scale. But if we have a solution that works in Amsterdam, the overall idea is that it would work in a lot of other more similar cities as well. So that would also help scale up companies to scale up their new business models in delivering their solutions. Next slide, please. Yeah, well, this is a picture of one of those labs. This one is in our office. It is actually a smart office, and it's the most sustainable building in the Netherlands, which also was attractive to the city of Amsterdam in partnering with us, of course. In the meantime, Amsterdam has set up several labs. Also, some of these labs are open not just for civil servants, but also for ecosystem partners to come and work there. And so they work with scale-ups in their labs. What we do is these innovations, we have expanded the bandwidth of the definition of smart cities. So we don't just look at the normal ones like circular economy or mobility or other typical smart city topics, but we also look at elements such as poverty reduction or reducing loneliness of people by connecting them via apps in their neighborhood. So that's the range of solutions and innovations that we work on. Next slide, please. On this slide, you can see the Smart City Point of View report. We have developed this for the city of Amsterdam, and we have extracted from them a Dutch Deloitte Netherlands Smart City Point of View. And in this 86-page report, we look at the disruptive technologies. Some of them are very helpful in are pushing the digitization of society and economy, and others are helpful in solving more problems in physical space. This has led to a framework where we plot the societal challenges. We can plot that for more cities, but we have done this specifically for Amsterdam, and then plot technologies and sectors and the smart city solutions in those sectors that are available or can be developed in those cities, in those sectors, to see if we can create quick wins or that we need to, for instance, combine ideas and combine technologies to find new solutions. Part of the point of view is a smart city maturity assessment that we have also done in the city of Amsterdam. And this assessment helps cities to assess their current state and define their desired maturity level in, let's say, 2 to 3 years. And then from that point onward, you can develop a roadmap with projects. And we're working currently with other member firms and cities in Europe on new projects. So next slide, please. Part of the Amsterdam strategy is to make use of their digital infrastructure. Amsterdam has a very good digital infrastructure, both in broadband and in mobile. It has the largest internet exchange in the world, and one is the third tier 1 data center hotspot in Europe in terms of capacity. And so it also, this part is also used to strengthen the Amsterdam regional economy. Next slide, please. Then we have the lessons learned. I will go through them in the last minute of my presentation. The first one is that it's very important to separate the ideation and innovation from existing operations, because people tend to be held back by the organization and by the way the organization is run. This one is based on the ideas of John Hagel and our Center for the Edge, and works very well in Amsterdam. That focus on new and innovative solutions on current problems. As explained, the third one is that we put a lot of effort in the government buy-in so that we get adequate investment and budget. We do that at the highest level in the city, but also at state level. And we provide only small budgets for ideation teams during the proof of concept phase to conserve funding for projects after proven success. And this also makes them more creative in finding other partners or using, for instance, Kickstarter to test and fund ideas. Next point is that we evaluate long-term financing options of innovations, and we are looking for options like crowdfunding, but also social impact bonds and the regular investment options. And lastly, and this is the most important point, we learn the city to work with a broad ecosystem of stakeholders. This also helps them not only to just find solutions, but basically also to learn about all these technologies and how to apply them. Thank you for your attention.
Great, thanks, Hans. And on to you, Denise.
Great, thanks, everybody. Good morning, everybody from the US, and good evening to the rest of the world. As Jim previously mentioned, I'm Denise Lee, and I transferred to our US firm middle of last year. Prior to that, I used to lead the Deloitte South Africa Emerging Technologies and Smart Solutions practice. And during that time, I had the privilege of working with many of our clients in South Africa to help them on their smart cities journeys and their agendas. I think when we think about South Africa and we think about Africa, it's kind of a bit of a dark place. The Economist refers to Africa as the awakening giant. It's rich in its natural resources and emerging economies. Africa is also predicted by large technology companies as the next big market. So Africa, in all honesty, is an emerging territory, and its developmental nature presents amazing opportunities, as well as some sizable challenges not otherwise experienced in the more mature states and countries that we see internationally. Can we go to the next slide, please? So the case study that we're talking about today is specifically Ekurhuleni, and translated, Ekurhuleni means a place of peace. It was born out of an 18-town convergence, and it epitomizes South Africa's Rainbow Nation's rich cultural heritage. There are over 14 official languages spoken in the metro, and it covers a large geographic land spans of roughly 1,975 square kilometers. It's also home to Africa's largest airport. It has a grid of interconnected transportation infrastructure, and EMM is known as Africa's workshop, given its large established manufacturing industry. It also enjoys over 40,000 small, medium, and micro-sized enterprises, epitomizing the entrepreneurial spirit that we know of this culture. EMM is one of the top 4 most influential metros within the South African geography, contributing around 7% to South Africa's gross domestic product. It has recently been recognized and elevated in the Moody's Global Ranking Scale. Ekurhuleni is considered a transitioning city when we think about the different classifications from a smart cities perspective. It is one that is undergoing rapid urbanization and having to respond to core infrastructural, service delivery, and governance challenges, which are quite different from legacy cities we see in mature geographies. With almost 72% of its population being of working age, a workforce capable of delivery is a massive advantage as the continent becomes globally competitive. However, high levels of unemployment compounded by a poor standard of education means that implementing innovative technologies capable of realizing a sustainable change does require an applied consideration, because you can't just drop down the best technology and expect it to work. Consideration around the people and the ability to leverage that is very, very important. We go to the next slide, please. A number of years ago, Ekurhuleni recognized the need for a clear plan that was capable of realistically addressing the challenges facing the metro. The growth and the development strategy was established, and it is under this umbrella that the EMM Digital City was born, with a vision of becoming a smart, creative, and developmental city. The 4 pillars of the EMM strategy are very citizen-centric. We see in many other countries and cities internationally that drivers are focused on the technology. It's quite different from an EMM perspective. Here, technology is considered an enabler rather than a driver. The importance of societal upliftment, underpinned by strong collaborative, cooperative, and transparent governance, is not only a pillar of success, but it is also a critical success factor. Recognizing the need for public-private participation, the collaboration between EMM, the community, and private enterprise makes EMM a unique case study, in that it is not just a case study of one specific smart domain project, but rather it is the building of the core framework and platform that ultimately enables all smart city and smart domain projects to be successful. On the next slide, we look at the specific case study. The vision around this was the mayor had a vision of being able to manage the entire city from his tablet, regardless of his location. The ability to drill down into any aspect of the city's functioning, be it from an emergency or non-emergency perspective, was very, very important in the governance transparency approach. The Unified Command and Control Center initiative has served multiple purposes. Most importantly, it provides the multi-channel communication strategy for EMM residents to communicate with the city, as well as the collaborative platform for EMM stakeholders and the associated ecosystem outside of EMM. It also covers the core framework that enables interfacing smart initiatives to regulate governance standards, the exchange of data, as well as the consideration of regulatory implications. In defining the strategy and operating model across all EMM departments, the differentiation between emergency and non-emergency services provided for the varied service offerings that were required therein. While state-of-the-art technology and infrastructure was identified and selected for the conceptual design and build of the Green Star rated building, the ability to share data in an open and strategic manner was required by EMM to enable the efficient and advanced use of data analytics, directly translating into meaningful insights that could be translated across all aspects of EMM, rather than just the silos in which they had since been present. The scope of the engagement included the evaluation of core smart technologies required along with the physical devices to capacitate such. Understanding potential key threats in the data exchange required a focused approach in the securitization of the data. Funding and skills needed were expanded upon. The Smart Cities initiative and initiatives generally are costly, and EMM wanted to ensure that the skills enablement requirements would directly translate into the enhanced job creation and work with the ultimate agenda of poverty reduction. Understanding what was required to safeguard the technology, the protection, and associated planning of the building construction, the ability to efficiently utilize investments made in times of emergency as well as in everyday use, the project focused on identifying what would be required to enable the vision and how could the investment then be leveraged to realize secondary smart objectives in the ecosystem. if we look at the next slide, EMM has since and continues leading the smart cities agenda in South Africa. With the implementation of various innovative smart initiatives, Ekurhuleni Municipal Metro has already started realizing quantifiable outcomes from the initiatives. Some of these initiatives include the introduction of e-health solutions, focusing around the single patient record and therefore being able to facilitate more efficient medical care to the citizens. One of the primary underpinning elements of the Ekurhuleni Digital City strategy is the interconnectivity, the broadband and Wi-Fi framework. To date, over 2,000 hotspots across 250 sites have been enabled across Ekurhuleni, and the primary focus on many of these is in the promotion of education and employment. From a smart utilities perspective, water qualification certification, public access and health is also a core initiatives coming out of Ekurhuleni today. Given the geographic spans and the ability for the citizens to be able to get clean water and be healthy is very, very, very key in the Ekurhuleni strategy around citizen centricity. From a smart consciousness perspective, learnathons have already started to be held, leveraging the interconnectivity, promoting technology education and utilization. Library initiatives have been held with the citizens to help them become centers of innovation and enablement, enabling the citizens further to collaborate and to contribute to the workforce by developing smart applications, smart technology interfaces. Finally, from a smart environment perspective, there are also multiple environmental campaigns working towards creating a cleaner and a safer environment for Ekurhuleni. With that, I would just like to say that I'm personally privileged and grateful for have had the opportunity to work together with Ekurhuleni on their project, and I'm very, very excited to wish them all the best in the global awards, of which they've been nominated for a Smart Cities award. And with that, I'd like to hand over to Jim.
Hello everybody, this is Jim back again, and we'll round this up with just a very brief description of a case study that we're currently very actively working on together with the US and Mexico CEO Dialogue, which is it's an initiative between the chambers, the national chambers of commerce of the two countries, the US and Mexico, and it's really focused on increasing the overall competitiveness of North America. So North America being Mexico, the US, and Canada. And Canada is sort of coming into this dialogue as well at this point. And in a way, if we just look at the next slide, please. In a way, the two case studies that you've seen before now, we're going to try and bring those together and then apply them in the very complex environment of the US-Mexico border. But just I don't know how familiar people on the call are with you know, the US border with Mexico, but you know, there's every day there's $1.4 billion of commerce and about 1 million people cross the border each way. We tend to see in the current sort of rhetoric around borders and immigration, you know, I think if you go down to the US-Mexico border and talk to the people who are actually living there and working on it, and the leaders who are down there trying to bring about economic development, you get a completely different picture to what's we're hearing through the current level of political rhetoric. And I believe that there's a great, or we believe there's a great opportunity here to turn this the border around from what is currently somewhat perceived as a you know, an obstacle of some kind, but to realize what we call the border dividend. And the way we've sort of looked at this is we have examined the border city pairs along the US-Mexico border, the main ones that are illustrated here on this slide. And we've just looked at what are the metrics around each of these border city pairs in terms of the commerce that happens across the border, and then the economic situation of the communities who live on each side of the border. That's represented in the slide there, and you can look at that when you download these slides after this webinar. If we look at the next slide, you'll see that we're looking at what are the factors that are in play at the border, and what could we do to transform the way we think about the US-Mexican border to help North American competitiveness, and to help, more importantly, help the communities along the border regions sort of improve their economic well-being through the application of some form of transformation. So, when we looked at it, we saw that there were the three sort of elements that were in tension with each other one way or another. I mean, obviously there's the need for security on both sides of the border, and the need for us to, maintain our borders properly, and to police people and goods that cross, and make sure that everybody's kept safe. And then, on the other side, we have economic advancement for both communities, and, to a certain extent, it influences globally, but both communities, and the need for, the efficient transfer of goods and people at the border, and less friction, so that we can get the economic benefits that we know are possible. And then the third element that we looked at is, there are financial constraints. There's probably more financial constraints on the southern side of the border, but equally in the US side now, we're facing financial constraints on public infrastructure and how it's funded, and our infrastructure main renewal of it, and coming up with new elements of infrastructure. So we came up with the idea of, and this is together with what's called the Transformation Working Group, which contains representatives from many of the large businesses on both sides of the US-Mexico border that came through the US Chamber of Commerce and the equivalent on the Mexican side. So there was a Transformation Working Group formed, and this is the concept that group came up with, and that we helped them come up with. This cross-border connected city concept. And the idea of this, in a nutshell, without going into all the words, was to take the programs that are currently being implemented in, I don't want to say a willy-nilly fashion, because that wouldn't be fair to the people that are doing it, but in a less than perfectly coordinated fashion by all of the different parties who are operating at the border, and take those programs and bundle them in selected pilot locations, and then use the smart city and technology connection capabilities to improve how these programs work together, and allow for better planning and better operations and better security, and more safe environment financially as well for investment. So if you look at the three elements, if you pull them closer together and get them to overlap, we're talking about improved data exchange and tracking and risk analysis, improved data for economic planning, better cross-border planning, and reduced investment risk, which again allows more private sector funding to come into essential infrastructure elements and social development elements. And again, data would help provide us with more reliable indicators of progress, and we could have pilot programs that would, in selected city pairs, it would allow us to allow all of the stakeholders to see how the progress is getting on there. So on the next slide, you'll see, when it comes up, I hope it's coming up for you guys. Yeah, so again, you'll see that in Hans's example, he talked about labs. Denise talked about all the stakeholders being involved. At the core of our methodologies for these is what we call a greenhouse or a lab, where we bring the stakeholders together and we promote discussion in a way that's sort of new, and just remove all of the previous sort of PowerPoint-based lecturing almost, and put people in an environment that's completely different to what they're used to, and it stimulates discussion, and we come out with the out of this by including public sector like federal, state, and local representatives, private sector from corporations, and various other interested stakeholders, and we prioritize the programs that we felt would help sort of put this cross-border connected city concept together. On the next slide, you'll see that this is basically what we came up with, and it's the idea of a transformation zone. And anybody who's on the call who knows me knows that I'm sort of an SEZ guy. So it's this kind of concept where a designated zone has a border, at its center, a border optimization area, but outside it in the next concentric circle, a city planning area, and then a regional planning area. And the whole idea is to push the border back through the use of opt-in schemes and technology, and ubiquitous broadband availability to sort of bring this to the state of the art, what's possible for security, for commerce, and for investment. And I won't go into the detail here because we'll be here all day. So I go on to the next slide, and that talks a little bit about, we got our economists to work on this. And without going into detail here, I mean, this idea of a border dividend is real. If these schemes were tried in a bundled fashion and a coordinated fashion in specific location, we would see that the investments made would provide, a 5 to 10 times return on investment, a very healthy economic return on investment for the kinds of investments that would be required here. And it's not that hard to do from a physical planning and from a technology point of view. I mean, the key to this is governance and cross-border cooperation and alliances. And on the next slide, you'll see how we're proposing to make that happen. Our original plan was to sort of to have a competition to identify a city pair that would be the one that would be the first of many along the border to benefit from the focusing of federal, state and local public investments in a very programmed way, and private money coming up alongside that then to co-invest to make this happen in specific pilot areas. We're working with state, federal, and private stakeholders to secure buy-in and investment there. That's actually happening right now. We're in discussion with several states on both sides of the border who have expressed interest in getting this transformation working in their border city pairs. And we have developed an action plan, an implementable action plan that goes along in 6 month sort of chunks to show how this can be achieved, and our own cadence to keep it going. I'll stop there because I don't want to ease into any more of the time for questions, and I'm sure there'll be many. So back to you, Jessie.
Great. Thanks so much, Jim. Thanks, Jim, Hans, and Denise. And we have a bunch of questions that have already come in. We're going to enter our Q&A time now with our three presenters. And there's been a few questions regarding the slides and recording of today's webinar, and we do have those recordings available to you. The slides are already available in your chat window. In your control panel, there's a link there to a Dropbox folder, so you can download a PDF of those slides now if you want. And we'll also be uploading a recording of today's webinar on our website, cityminded.org. If you go to the calendar page, you'll see the webinar from today and the event page, and we will have the recording up there within the next 48 hours. So that answers a couple questions we've received, but we have a lot of content questions. First, let's go to you, Hans. There's some questions regarding the Amsterdam Smart Cities ecosystem. Who are those partners? How did you recruit them? And what did they contribute in kind? What was the kind of relationship there and application process? Did you accept for-profits, non-profits? Are they there as a cohort for a certain number of months? Can you tell us a little bit more about the whole Amsterdam Smart Cities ecosystem and incubator?
Yeah, it's a complex question, so I don't know if I will touch on all the aspects, but let me give it a try. Of course, a lot of corporates already had connections with Amsterdam, especially in the technology space. So parties like, I'm not sure if I'm allowed to mention all parties via our policy, but parties that generally work with a lot of cities like Cisco, SAP, etc. So technology, a lot of technology firms and media firms are in there. Amsterdam has a lot of startups in their region, and what they have recently, since about 2 years, they have a chief technology officer, and one of his goals is to have the city connected to those startups and scale-ups as much as possible. So that was one way of building the ecosystem. And the other part was that we have a lot of partners that we work with that we also do innovation projects for. So we knew from our partners, and those are also a lot of corporates, and I won't be naming them, but those were parties that, like big banks, big companies like insurance companies, building companies, construction firms, energy utility firms with solutions in the green area or in the circular economy area, etc. So it was bringing together the context they already had and the ones we had, in these accelerators, we asked the corporates to work in kind. And depending a bit on the state of where the innovation is, or where the scale-ups and startups are in their development phase, sometimes we, or the City of Amsterdam has a budget for them, and sometimes it's also for them to rapidly develop their business model and their solution, of course. So it's a mixed bag of in kind and in cash. And some of the partners in the corporate area have dropped an amount that I can't repeat yet, but it's a substantial.
Great. Yeah, thanks, Tom. Is there a place that our participants can find out more about the incubator model on the Deloitte website or elsewhere?
No, it's not on our website, but if people contact me, I can of course give them more insights.
Okay, great. And Jenny, maybe there's a slide you can share with the contact information of the presenters in case people want to get in touch. Great. And there's our presenters in case anyone wants to ask specific questions of Jim, Denise, or Hans. The question for you, Jim, this is from Peter Schmidt. He's asking, what do you see as some of the legal legislative challenges to implementing the paired border cities concept on the U.S.-Mexico border, and what response did you see to these questions from the Washington and Mexico participants?
Yeah, that's a great question, and the key issue really is the governance model for such a thing. So clearly changing laws with respect to federal border entry or new ports of entry are just we took that completely off the table. We believe that within the current legal system on both sides of the border, it's possible to implement a lot of very striking improvements. The funniest, or not the strangest part might be that sometimes it has more to do with regulations, say to do with transport and with trucking and other regulations that I think could be changed at an executive level within the secretary, the departments on each side, that would have the greatest impact. So we've been focusing on getting governors at the governor level, state law, state regulations really more aligned on both sides of the border, and we're sort of behind this whole idea is the whole disruption idea that change that comes up from the bottom and would come from the mayors and the governors of the states back up to national government are probably going to achieve more success than trying to get a top-down approach. However, we should say that the Secretary of Commerce, the U.S. Secretary of Commerce, is very much supportive of this idea, and we have had on the Mexican side, the Secretary of Foreign Affairs and others, attend the sessions and say that they support it. So, but to answer your question, we're really focusing on regulations that would change, that are within the ambit of governors and would not require actually a law to be passed.
Great, thanks, Jim. And I noticed, this is my own question, but I noticed Brownsville was on the map that you showed, which is, according to the U.S. Census, either first or second poorest city in the U.S. How are you working with the mayor, city officials in Brownsville? What's their reaction been, especially since obviously they have a massive jobs and economic development problem in their city?
Yeah, so we haven't actually taken up, individually with that city yet. We're more at a state level, and we're trying to, this process actually is within the U.S. CEO dialogue and the transformation working group. So we're working through the chambers on both sides and bringing the states along as we can. So it's gained momentum, at the state level, but it's really it's a very political type of development, and this is like a technological or technical sort of idea, looking for the best place to take root, and that's the process that we're in right now. So, the process is every bit as important as the actual solution. I know that doesn't really answer your question, but that's kind of how this process is moving forward. Great.
No, that's very helpful. And hopefully you guys can come back in a year and give another webinar update, the Meeting of the Minds Network, on where that project sits. So a few questions. One for you, Denise. I think one important aspect of smart cities are the people and the human component. Do you have any observations about your smart cities work in South Africa in regards to kind of your own personal observations?
Yeah, thanks for the question. I think, again, smart cities is very much about doing things better, more efficiently for the citizen, and working together with EMM on the projects and seeing the outcome, the tangible results, where people are now actually able to have clean running water, and the city is able to measure that. People are able to interact directly, real time, and people, you know, in terms of the alliances, the public-private partnership that's been established, being able to not only grow and being able through the educational platform, but they're also enabled to identify and build innovative solutions that is directly converting into commercializable intellectual property. Is, from an ecosystem perspective, it's just amazing and quite humbling to watch. It's just fantastic with the advent of technology when you've got the right attitude and you've got the right mindset together. It is the art of the possible. If you can imagine it, you can make it.
Great. Thanks for that. We have a question from Julia. And Jim, I'll direct this at you, but are there some general characteristics that make a city, that give a city a great potential to be a smart city? Are there some underlying characteristics that you see need to be in place before a smart city strategy is applied to a particular place?
Yeah, that is a great question, and you know, it's one that we sort of took a good look at as well. You know, clearly there are some obvious factors, and the factors are, you know, the main one I would say is the leadership and governance within the city that promotes and allows this kind of disruptive technology and innovation to take place. And that and the reason that's important is, I think one characteristic of the smart city initiatives that we've seen from all the case studies are that you have to be, if you want your city to embrace this, you have to enter new kinds of partnerships with partners and stakeholders and that you may not have thought of before. Number one, that might be a partnership with a technology provider, and then you share the data, and that's kind of how the you know, what previously would have been revenue, now, you know, information and data is where the value is as well. That might be one aspect. Another aspect is the transparency side. You know, a key characteristic of smart cities is that you're not just granting the citizenry, you know, the right. They already have it. But you're enabling the interaction where, you know, the needs and wants of the citizenry and the desires of citizenry are what's going to be prioritized in a very democratic way. But also, you're prepared to report back on what's going on and where as a city administration, where you're performing really well and where you're not performing well, and you know, hold yourself accountable. So I think that there's an attitude shift there that is, you know, allows supports the whole smart city, or the smart city concept, I guess, helps to push forward. So that'd be the main characteristics. Obviously, there needs to be then some champions from the stakeholders, both the private sector and the public sector, who are willing to get behind the investments, because some of the returns on these investments take a little bit longer than others, and then they're needed from a backbone point of view.
Great. Thanks. Yeah, great.
May I add a point here? It's
yes, go ahead, Hans. Thanks.
What is very important for a city to become successful as a smart city is that they are able to attract talent to their city to get the best ideas at the table. So one point would be that you have scientists in your region and technology experts. You have business model innovators, but also you have let's say the the group of artists that bring the spark of inspiration to the solutions. And the second one is that a group of talent that is largely underestimated is the citizens themselves. So they have a lot of ideas on how to solve their problems and a lot of energy in solving them, and giving them access to bring their ideas to the table and to test their ideas and to support them in doing so and enabling them, empowering them. That is another key success factor.
Great. That's a great addition. And Denise, any perspective from the South African perspective on this and key characteristics needed for a smart city strategy to work?
Yeah, I think the mindset, as Hans and Jim have mentioned, the mindset and the attitude certainly need to be there. I think when citizenry start looking at success and measuring success in a different way, illustratively, when the measure evolves from something that's quantitative, like how many, how often, at what point, to a qualitative measurement. So how effective is it? How much more can I do with what I have? I think at that point, when that thinking starts changing and evolving, I think you definitely have the mindset that is enabled with the right people, the right innovation, the right technology. Then you've got a fantastic algorithm, I think, that you can apply to any smart cities initiative. The one thing, though, is that we should all be aware and remember that the smart cities agenda it's an evolving journey, right? It's definitely a path to travel. It doesn't have a definitive start and a definitive end. It is very, very specific to the requirements of each city and each geography, but it does require the collaboration of people, process, and technologies. It's a system within systems.
Great. And there's a bunch of questions we haven't been able to get to, but there's two that I can combine. And this is on the U.S.-Mexico border case study. Jim and Gianni Carbonara and Alex Zatlukal, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, Alex. But can you, Jim, explain a little bit more in detail about what constitutes the border dividend in 5 to 10 ROI and how you guys came to that conclusion?
Yeah, sure, happy to. And as you can imagine, there's been a lot of discussion about that along the way. And we did at one point publish, not publish, but within the group, we circulated some kind of detailed, semi-detailed calculations. But we took the standard kind of measures that you would look at. When you look at the investment that would be required to reduce, say, waiting times at the border by a certain amount, and you add up the cost of that waiting time, that would be one measure. Another would be, we based on other case studies globally, we looked at the level of employment that would be created by increased activity and reduced friction at the borders, and not just the border, but in the area, in the region around it, where industries could expand more quickly and be more productive. And we made estimates based on sort of standard productivity estimates, that kind of thing. And we took like 5 or 6 factors, and we looked at what it would cost to achieve it and what the net present value of the benefit would be. And that's the kind of number we came up with. In a classic economic cost-benefit study, I think it would come out at about that level. It's really very striking as to the benefits that can be received. There's a great political case to be made here.
Great, thanks. And I encourage our participants to contact our 3 presenters individually if they have more questions that we weren't able to get to today. I'm sorry we don't have more time, but to continue this conversation, Jim Mulgar will be moderating a panel at our annual summit next month on de-risking cities, new approaches to development and operations in the era of urban growth, climate change, and cybersecurity. A real mouthful, but it's going to be a great conversation at our annual summit, and I know there were some questions about that in the question panel, and that our summit convenes October 25 26th, and 27th in the San Francisco Bay Area. More information on that is available at cityminded.org. At the top of the page, you'll see 2016 Summit, and there's a drop-down menu there with our agenda, speakers, sponsors, the startup demos that will be taking place, our sponsors, and more info there and registration. So with that, we really appreciate everybody's feedback. So a short survey will pop up once you close your browser. And we hope to see you at next month's webinar. We have a monthly webinar series on our blog, cityminded.org, and of course our annual summit, which I just mentioned, October 25, 26, 27. I know a lot of Deloitte folks will be there. You can have an in-person conversation with them about all of this work, and that's all available at cityminded.org. So with that, that concludes our session for today. Thank you so much, Jim, Hans, and Denise.
Thanks very much.
Thanks, everybody. We'll see you soon. Thanks so much. And with that, we're done. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.